Hello, Autry. My name is Anita Foster. I'm the Library Media Specialist at Autry Middle School in Kennesaw, Georgia. And today, for First Chapter Read, we are continuing our banned books. All through September, we're reading banned books for our September First Chapter Reads. So today, Miss Foster does not read this genre. I do not like this genre at all. So today, Miss Mary is reading this genre because it is horror. And you guys know that we have the bright orange stickers for you guys when we genrefied the books. We put bright orange stickers on the horror books because that means Foster, stay away. But we're very lucky because Miss Mary, that bright orange sticker attracts her because she loves her horror genre. So please enjoy Miss Mary as she reads to you a special horror banned book.
Hello, Autry, and anybody else who might be out there listening. It is time for another installment of Reading Banned Books. Now, this particular author, everyone is familiar with. If you've been in a movie theater in the last few years, if you have gone into any library, school, or public or otherwise, he, for quite a few years, was the #1 best-selling author in the world, and yes, that includes over J.K. Rowling. And his books have been challenged on the basis that they're too scary and too graphic. Now, before that frightens your parents, it's R.L. Stine, same guy who does Goosebumps. This one is The House of Whispers. You'll never be allowed to leave. One of the things that the students that come to Autry know is that there are two truths in our library. One, Miss Foster does not do horror books at all. Two, Miss Mary does. If it has a scary theme, I've either read it or it's in a stack for me to finish reading. All right. Chapter 1. October 1863. What will it be like living with Angelica Fear? Amy wondered nervously. She stared out at the window as the carriage rolled past the stately homes and moss-covered trees of New Orleans, bringing her closer and closer to the Fear family. Amy Pierce had heard stories about Angelica, whispered rumors that she possessed a dark and terrible power. But Amy didn't want to believe in the gossip. Her father and Angelica were cousins, and he always defended Angelica. He insisted that the ugly rumors had been started by people who were jealous of Angelica's wealth, beauty, and sophistication. That does tend to happen. "Excuse me, miss," the driver said, glancing at her over his shoulder. "It's none of my business, but are you going to the Fears?" He sounds nervous, Amy thought. Has he heard the stories about the Fears? "My father was badly hurt in the war," Amy explained, and her voice trembled a little. "My mother has gone to Virginia to take care of him, and I am to stay with the Fears until she comes home." He looked at her again, a worried expression on his face. "Wasn't there anywhere else you could go?" he asked. "Some relative? Anyone? Somewhere?" "Mrs. Fear is my second cousin," Amy replied. "She is in need of a companion while her husband is away during his war work." "Sorry, miss," the driver said quickly. "I didn't mean anything by my questions. My missus is always saying I talk too much." He slapped the reins against the horses' backs, urging them to go faster. Amy's stomach tightened. She wished she could have remained at home. She could take care of herself. But young ladies were not allowed to stay alone, no matter how capable they were. It was not proper, her mother said. And Cousin Angelica does need help, Amy reminded herself. She had 2 girls and 3 little boys to look after with no husband to help. Secretly, Amy felt relieved that Angelica's husband would not be at home. She had heard stories about Simon Fear, too. Some people thought he killed all of Angelica's suitors so Angelica would be forced to marry him. And most people agreed that Simon's war work involved selling supplies to whichever side would pay the highest price. Would he really aid the North? Amy wondered. Even the Union soldiers who held New Orleans, his home, captive. Amy leaned forward and tapped on the driver's shoulder. "What can you tell me about the Fears? I met them only once when I was a little girl, but I don't remember much." "I cannot tell you anything about the Fears," he muttered. "Nothing at all." "Then why are you afraid of them?" Amy asked. I'm not, the man shot back. I told you I don't know anything about them. He is lying, Amy thought. I know he's lying. But why? With a sharp snap of the reins, the driver turned the carriage onto a long, curving drive. Amy drew in her breath as she caught sight of the Fears mansion. It was the biggest house she had ever seen, and the most elegant. White marble columns stood in rows on both sides of the front door. The carriage jerked to a halt in front of the broad porch steps. The driver helped her down and dropped Amy's bag on the ground beside her. Then he jumped into the carriage and hurriedly drove away. A cold shiver ran up Amy's spine. She felt so alone. Did the Fears really want her to stay with them, or did they just feel like it was their duty? A beautiful, dark-haired woman came out onto the porch. Angelica Fear. She was even more beautiful than Amy remembered. Her green eyes glittered as she held out her hands to Amy. "Cousin," Angelica called, "I am so glad to see you." Angelica's tone was cordial, and she did appear happy to see Amy. Amy felt herself relax. Angelica started down the steps, and Amy could only stare. She had never seen anyone so poised and elegant. Ugh, how Amy wished she could be like that. Angelica took Amy's hands. "Welcome to New Orleans, my dear." Without thinking, Amy pulled back. Angelica's touch was like ice. I hope she didn't notice my reaction, Amy thought. "I am sorry it's so late, Cousin Angelica," Amy said quickly. "We were delayed by a storm." "You must be exhausted," Angelica exclaimed. "Let's get you settled in." Amy nodded and reached for her carpet bag. "Oh, don't bother with that," Angelica instructed. "The servants will take care of it." Amy flushed. She wasn't used to having servants. She and her parents lived simply. Amy hoped that she didn't appear like a silly little country mouse to her sophisticated cousin. Angelica led Amy inside. A chandelier filled the front room with light. The floor was of pale marble, and a massive gilt-frame mirror reflected the wide staircase that curved up to the second floor. "This is beautiful," Amy breathed. She knew she was staring, but she couldn't help herself. "Oh, thank you." Angelica's lips curved into a smile. "Amy, I want you to meet my daughters, Hannah and Julia." She gestured to two young girls toward them. "Welcome, Cousin Amy," Hannah said brightly. She hurried up and kissed Amy on the cheek. "Thank you," Amy answered. Hannah will be as beautiful as her mother someday, Amy thought. The girl was in her early teens, tall and slender. Her blonde hair fell in waves down her back, and her brown eyes sparkled. "Julia," Angelica said softly. The other girl jumped and then scurried over to Amy and kissed her on the cheek. "Hello, Cousin Amy," she murmured, her eyes on the floor. Now, Julia reminded Amy of herself in her early teens. Shy and awkward. It must be hard for Julia to have such a pretty sister, she thought. Julia had Angelica's shiny black hair, but her face was plain, her jaw too wide and her nose too long. "All right, girls," Angelica said. "You stayed up to greet your cousin. Now off to bed." Angelica turned to Amy. "The boys have been in bed for hours. You'll meet them tomorrow." Julia obediently headed up towards the stairs, but Hannah turned to her mother with an exaggerated pout. "Please, can't I stay up a little while longer?" she begged. "I want to visit with Cousin Amy." "Darling, you will have plenty of time to talk to Amy tomorrow," Angelica answered. "Julia is older, and she's going upstairs now." "Ugh, Julia!" Hannah exclaimed, tossing her golden hair. She'd rather be alone in her room anyway. Angelica laughed and kissed Hannah on top of her head. "Hannah's like me," she explained to Amy. "She just loves excitement." Amy looked up at Julia. The girl stood on the stairs watching her mother and Hannah. No expression lit the girl's gray eyes, but Amy knew Julia felt hurt. Even to a newcomer, it was obvious that Angelica doted on pretty, outgoing Hannah and ignored plain, quiet Julia. "Off to bed now," Angelica finally said. She stroked Hannah's cheek. "Good night." Hannah whirled and ran up the stairs past Julia. Julia slowly followed her sister. No one said good night to her. Angelica turned and smiled at Amy. "Oh, you have grown up so," she commented. Her green eyes flicked up and down from Amy's shoes to the top of her head. "I must look like such a country bumpkin," Amy thought. "My shoes are too heavy and my dress is too plain." "How old are you now?" Angelica asked. 17, Amy replied. "Such a wonderful age. Oh, I see my Aunt Thelma in you. You have her chestnut hair, and you have inherited my grandmama's hazel eyes. You are lovely." Amy's cheeks burned again. Angelica laughed. "I'm embarrassing you." She reached out and ran one cold fingertip along Amy's cheek. "I think you're going to fit into our family beautifully," she said. "I feel as though you were one of us already." Her words were kind, but Amy remembered how upset the carriage driver sounded when she tried to coax him into talking about the fears. "Well, we'd better let you get some rest," Angelica said, clapping her hand sharply, startling Amy. A maid came in the door at the far end of the room. When she stepped into the light, Amy saw that she had a pleasant, friendly face. "Nellie, take Amy upstairs," Angelica said. "Help her unpack and get her anything she needs." "Yes, ma'am," Nellie replied. "Good night, Amy," Angelica murmured. She leaned down and kissed Amy on the cheek. Her lips felt cool, too. "This way, Miss Amy," Nellie called. Amy followed her up the stairs and down a long hall. "This is your room," Nellie said, opening a door on the left. Amy walked in, and a shiver raced through her. "Someone just walked over your grave," Nellie said cheerfully. "What?" Amy exclaimed. "What did you say?" "Oh," Nellie said, "I'm sorry. It's just something my mother used to say when someone shivered like that. It doesn't mean anything, and please don't tell Mrs. Fear I frightened you." "Of course not," Amy said. "I've just never heard that expression, that's all." She smiled apologetically. That's a hard word for me. "You must be tired after traveling so far, miss. I'll unpack your things so you can freshen up." Nellie picked up Amy's carpet bag. It looked even more faded and battered in these rich surroundings. So would her clothes. "I would rather unpack my own things, thank you," Amy told her. "Oh, no, miss," the maid protested, opening the worn bag. "That would not be right. Mrs. Fear told me to unpack for you, and that is exactly what I must do." Amy pulled a blue gown from the carpet bag and shook it out. It was Amy's best dress, and her favorite. Here in this elegant room, it looked shabby. "This is a pretty color for you," the maid said. "Blue is Miss Hannah's favorite color. It used to be Miss Julia's too, but she says she changed hers to red." Amy let Nellie chatter away. She didn't have to say anything, just smile and nod at the right times. Since Nellie likes to talk so much, Amy thought, maybe she will answer some questions about the fears. "There," Nellie said, stepping away from the closet. Amy's 3 dresses and 2 nightgowns had really not taken very long to unpack. "Good night, miss." "Don't go," Amy protested. "Stay and talk for a few more minutes. Have you been with the Fears long?" Nellie's friendly smile faded away. "Nearly 5 years," she answered quietly. "Do you like them?" Nellie shot her a glance and then dropped her gaze to the floor, but not before Amy saw fear in her eyes. "Of course I like them," Nellie mumbled. "I have to go. The family eats breakfast at 7:30, but we can fix you something any time." Nellie hurried out of the room. Amy could hear her footsteps swiftly retreating down the hall. Nellie acted exactly the way the carriage driver did, Amy realized. With a sigh, Amy plopped down on the chair in front of the dressing table and started brushing her hair. "Don't let your imagination run wild," she instructed herself. Angelica was nice to her. Everyone made Amy feel welcome. But Amy could not get rid of the cold, chilling feeling that something was wrong in this house. "I wish," she began, and the words died in her throat as a pale, round face appeared in the mirror. It hung motionless above a cloud of white, dark holes for eyes, a slash for a mouth. Amy's throat went dry, her pulse pounded in her ears, and slowly the apparition reached for her. All right, now that is the first chapter. The one thing that does bother me is that I think it's a little heavy-handed and obvious for the main character to be named Fear. But that's just me. All right, Autry, enjoy that. Come check these out. We've got a ton of them, and Halloween is coming.